Ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha. Whenever you see the word Denuvo, it tends to generate a nearly pathological hatred on the part of gamers, myself included, due to the countless negative experiences that the Denuvo DRM has caused over the years. When implemented properly, it can have no negative impact whatsoever. However, purchasing a game with Denuvo DRM installed is a gamble for most gamers as they are purchasing the game under the fervent hope that the DRM implementation has been done correctly, which, let's be honest here, it rarely is. Now, bear in mind this is different than the new Denuvo Anti Cheat, which will be the focus of discussion today. And while I'm seeing a lot of doomsaying surrounding the inclusion of the Denuvo Anti Cheat in Doom Eternal, I am not seeing a lot of valid information being provided in terms of kernel level access, why it might be needed, and why it seems to be so terrifying in nature. And as I will be discussing some things that are of a technical nature, I look forward to the hundreds of comments that will be soon to follow, naysaying and picking apart everything included here in this video. On May the 14th, Bethesda announced in a feature update that they would be adding the Denuvo Anti Cheat system for Doom Eternal. This is apparently the flagship launch for Denuvo's new system. This system, as claimed by Denuvo, installs a kernel mode driver on the system, and the anti-cheat system can be uninstalled via the Add or Remove Programs interface in Windows. And let's see how many times I can say system without tripping up. Denuvo states that the anti-cheat system launches and closes along with the game and only monitors multiplayer gameplay. They further state that the system is GDPR compliant, it takes no screenshots, and does not scan your file system or stream shellcode. Now, many people simply heard the dreaded term Denuvo and were incensed that Bethesda had decided to include DRM without disclosing that fact to the public in any way, and including DRM post-launch is an exceptionally foolish thing to do, and it would very rightly incur the wrath of any who had purchased it. However, as stated, this is the anti-cheat system, not the DRM system. And naturally, many people have decried this anti-cheat system as it does use a kernel mode driver to function. And one such individual even provided us with a rather handy little graphic to outline in a generalized sense the different levels of privileges in terms of access on your computer. The first is Ring 3. This is where all of your applications generally live. The second is Rings 2 and 1, which have increased levels of access, and the example there is stating device drivers. Then we have the Ring of Doom, pun intended, Ring 0, the kernel ring. This is at the system level and is the most privileged access level. This is for core system services, and below this handy-dandy little graphic they state, it can interfere with normal operation of the OS, causing errors or faults which reduces stability and system performance overall. It can collect information on everything the operating system is doing while potentially transmitting said information to whoever it pleases. You only have the software creator's word that this is not happening. It presents an extreme risk, as if hackers discover and utilize exploits in the software, they can gain complete control of your machine. And they continue to state at the end of their post, "I love Doom Eternal as much as you all do, but I will not allow it, or anyone else for that matter, to get away with installing what amounts to malware on my machine after the fact, and neither should you. This should not be allowed to fly under the radar, since it will become commonplace if we sit around and accept it. This erodes the security, stability, and privacy of our machines for a tiny gain of reduced cheating. Spread this information to your friends and do not cave on the matter until id responds by either removing Denuvo Anti-Cheat from Doom Eternal or severely limiting its scope. I would not have purchased the game had this been included at launch or even announced. Throwing it in later and telling us to bite the pillow after our money was spent is a slap in the face of the consumer." And as I myself have had no real experiences investigating an anti-cheat software or why it functions the way it does, I myself could offer dozens of doomsday scenarios that would frighten your average person. However, I chose to seek out if anyone happened to be discussing something similar that could provide some additional information and context, and I did in fact find someone doing exactly that. As stated, I located this post on the Secret Club discussing the anti-cheat for Valorant, dubbed Vanguard, that discusses the dreaded kernel level of Doom and why these anti-cheat systems make use of kernel level access, and bear with me as there will be a fair amount of reading here. Let's start from the beginning. protection rings. This security abstraction layer is implemented to isolate system-critical data on your machine. Essentially, this is used to isolate untrusted applications, third-party applications, from the core parts of your machine, the kernel. What does this mean in practice? Let's say you execute your favorite browser, boongabrowser.exe. What does this application have access to when executed as a user mode Ring 3 process? Well, if we don't treat UAC as a security measure like Microsoft, then boongabrowser.exe still has access to practically anything on your machine. It is able to manipulate almost all parts of the file system. It is able to read and manipulate the memory of any other normal process that you're running. So what exactly is the purpose of running your code in the kernel context, Ring 0? The main difference between the different levels of privilege is the accessibility of memory and instructions. User mode Ring 3 applications are isolated from kernel mode Ring 0 applications, because kernel mode determines how user mode behaves, and user mode applications therefore cannot access kernel memory. In the world of computers, the closer you are to hardware, the more control you have. Thus, a lower privilege means greater control. This is, of course, grossly oversimplified, but for the context of this article, it is sufficient. And he continues to discuss specifically why an anti-cheat system running in user mode or Ring 3 would be absolutely pointless. Now, if you make your anti-cheat solely user mode, you have no way of guaranteeing the integrity of the kernel. Game hackers could have already loaded a vulnerable driver, gained kernel-level access, and embedded themselves into the kernel before the game application is even loaded. There would literally be no way for a user mode program to detect cheat software like this, and us game hackers have been abusing this fact for years. He then continues to discuss the specific needs for this kind of permission level. A kernel anti-cheats needs this kind of permission for multiple things: ensuring the integrity of the Windows kernel, prevent interoperability such as memory access to certain processes by blocking handle creation, registering events to track usage of system resources, monitoring process creation, image load, etc. This is exactly the same reason why every single antivirus application in existence utilizes kernel components. Almost all commercial anti-cheat solutions, this includes BattlEye and Easy Anti-Cheat, utilize kernel components to ensure the integrity of the user experience. And in terms of some people's concerns, such as privacy objections, or if the anti-cheat is for some reason hacked, he discusses that as well. For example, the statement that kernel-level permissions are considered maximum access. Remember, maximum access. This means it could go into your Google Chrome and ask it for all of your saved passwords, or just sit there quietly reading them out while you type them, including your online banking, etc. To which he responds, you do not need a bootloading kernel driver to dump Google Chrome passwords, grab banking detail, or log your keystrokes. So this would be said about any user mode application you install on your computer. There's a good reason why almost all spyware is running solely in user mode. It simply is not necessary to be kernel for any of this surveillance. So the reason for the kernel-level access in anti-cheat systems is there for very specific factors, because there are a massive number of cheat systems out there that specifically do kernel-level code injection and direct memory access systems in order to modify how the game behaves. And at a user-level context, an anti-cheat system would be utterly incapable of verifying the data and ensure it is not being tampered with. Now, I do have to include the very simple fact that we have seen countless other anti-cheat systems ban players for third-party software that was running that was not accessing or modifying the game in any way. That is, if they can be taken at their word, which for the sake of argument, let's assume for a moment that those claims are in earnest. And in that, I can certainly agree and understand that there are many anti-cheat systems that seem to be overstepping their bounds. There are a lot of arguments floating around online, though, that kernel translates to evil in many people's minds. However, I do agree that we don't see this sort of backlash with anti-cheat systems such as BattlEye and Easy Anti-Cheat. Now, I suspect that the majority of this outrage comes as a combination of automatic hatred for Denuvo DRM and how well that has been ingrained into people's visceral reactions, and a fair amount of fear generation for people not fully comprehending the reason behind something such as this. And so I find myself here in yet another instance of, I'm sure, people wanting me to rant and rave over Bethesda and id Software's decision here. However, I felt in this instance that it would be more beneficial to reserve my own judgment and try to look for information from experienced sources as opposed to ranting and raving. And to tell you the truth, I'm glad that I did. After finding this information, I honestly don't have nearly as great of a problem with it as I initially did. The anti-cheats have become a staple of online gaming due to the significant numbers of bad actors out there, and as such, these anti-cheat systems have to have the capacity to detect the cheats being implemented, or they will be completely ineffectual. And I've seen enough online games that have been so completely overrun with cheaters to know that it does destroy the online portion of the game and makes me not even want to play it. So in this instance, while there are plenty of things to rail at Bethesda over, especially in recent months, I do not believe this to be one of them. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha, and I'll see you next time.